Welcome to the third and the last FCI Forest and Communities Initiative. Bienvenidos a la tercera y última edición del webinario IBC Iniciativa Bosques y Comunidades. Bienvenue à tous pour la troisième et la dernière session de webinaire FCI, l'initiative Forêt et Communauté. A translation is available in English, so please choose, si tu peux mettre le texte. So a translation is available in English, so please choose the relevant channel in the interpretation facilities as highlighted below on the screen. Una traducción está disponible en español, por favor escoja el canal indicado en las opciones de configuración. Une traduction simultanée en français est disponible, merci de sélectionner le canal approprié. Now, I have the great pleasure to leave the floor to Olivier Venden. Thank you very much for joining, who is Vice President and Chief Executive Officer at Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation, for a quick introduction. Olivier, over to you.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Buenos días a todos y a todas. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. I'm Olivier Venden, I'm the CEO of Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation, and I'm extremely pleased to welcome you and inaugurate this final webinar on behalf of our partners, our 4 partners who joined the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation in co-designing and launching this wonderful initiative. And I would like to name them again today. So the IUCN, the International Ranger Federation, the Global Forest Coalition, and the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. Thank you for the phenomenal work you have been achieving with us so far. Again, extremely proud. Prince Albert has been following the development of this initiative very, very intensively and with great interest. So I'm glad that during my meeting next week with him, I can debrief him on the successful, meaningful, and valuable webinars that have been participating in. So yes, indeed, today is the final and third webinar that we host. The expectations are high, and I always want to be thankful and grateful for your investment in helping us co-design. Why do we have expectations and so high expectations? Because we want to launch an initiative with meaningful impact. We want to co-design with you a toolkit. We want to co-design with you policy brief to make sure that we will not reinvent the wheel, but place all our efforts, our joint and collective efforts, in doing the right things, first and foremost, to protect our forests desperately. But, and I think it's as important as the first pillar of our activity, to make sure that the voice and the rights of indigenous communities are better heard, better protected, and widely spread. We strongly believe here at the foundation that the resilience that we are all looking for on land or at sea, this resilience can only work and can be only implemented with the indigenous community's knowledge. So your participation today to this webinar, but also to the past 2 ones, is extremely important, and I would like to thank you very much indeed for your great work. I don't want to be too long, so I will pass it on now again to Prune to run through the webinar agenda. Thank you once again, and thank you for all your support.
Thank you very much, Olivier. Really appreciated, and really appreciated for you to actually come to that webinar for the introduction. So, dear participants, as you know, following your registration, this is the third and the last of a series of 3 webinars that some of you would have attended the 2 first ones, or it might be new. So I'm just going to repeat a few things that some of you may already heard. Those 3 webinars will inform our first FCI conference to be hosted by all FCI partners that Olivier has just mentioned in Monaco next November. So far, we have already addressed 3 topics, which were the effective forest conservation methodology for IPLCs, the right-based and gender-just approach in forest conservation, and the role of law in forest conservation. We are very proud to have reunited more than 160 people from more than 50 countries across the 2 webinars. And we thank you very much for those of you who have already provided some feedback via our feedback form. For those of you who haven't yet, we are looking forward to receiving it. Please note that for those who could not join, we are currently looking into having the recordings being made available on our website, and we expect those to be available once all the webinars will be finished. In today's webinar, we will look into 3 topics, being reconnecting national and international funding and governance to IPLCs for forest conservation during the first hour. And the second hour will address 2 products that we hope to release in November, like Olivier mentioned, the Roots Toolkit and the Policy Brief. Our discussion during these webinars will help us deliver and define these deliverables. We're not looking at reinventing any wheel, like Olivier mentioned, and your experience and expertise will be absolutely crucial to ensure that these products will be as useful as possible for you to use. In terms of the format for today's session, please expect to have, for the first topic, about 15 to 20 minutes of a panel discussion, which will leave about 30 minutes for questions and open conversation, together with ideas to be raised by all of you, our dear participants. And for the second half, we will try to stick to 15 minutes on the policy brief and 30 to 40 minutes on the Roots Toolkit. The panel will be really short, as we want to have as much time as possible to gather your thoughts and feedback and expectation for those 2 deliverables. We thank you very much for coming today, and we look forward to your active participation. Before we start, and before I hand over to the panel, like on both webinars I would like to just set a few rules to follow during these webinars to ensure that we have a productive session. First, as mentioned earlier, please choose the appropriate channel for the translation. This webinar will be translated in English, French, and Spanish, and you can choose the appropriate channel in the interpretation function below, as previously mentioned. Secondly, please turn your microphone off whilst listening. We will turn your microphone off when a background noise is heard, just to make sure that it doesn't divert from the panel discussion. Finally, following the panel discussion, we will be encouraging you all to participate actively. You can write your question directly in the chat section on the right, so feel free to do so whilst the panel speak, and we will take them once the floor opens. Otherwise, you will also be able to ask your question orally directly to our panel. Before doing so, I will ask you to raise your hand and introduce yourself, to giving your name, surname, country, and organization you represent. Now, with all of those information, let's start our first topic. Lucy, I'm more than welcoming you, and I will leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Prune, and thank you, everyone. And also thank you to the partners for really organizing this and supporting each other for the last 2 other webinars. And our participation is very crucial, and we are happy that we have as many as possible. Knowing very well that forest conservation is very crucial for Indigenous peoples. It's our life, it's the air that we breathe, is the food, is the medicine, and it's everything that we really value. And looking at the global biodiversity framework, issues of forest are very crucial, and we are really happy that we are discussing this today. We are also happy with this particular topic of reconnecting national and international funding and governance, considering that Indigenous people have also been very keen in terms of really discussing and wanting the funding and issues of governance, making clear that we have it and we can be able to really present and also deliver. And funding issues have been very difficult. And for both biodiversity and climate change, these are the issues that are also on top of our agenda. And as the International Indigenous Forum, we are really very excited that we are really discussing this. And it's something that we have been doing and we are going to carry forward from here. So today, just as Prune said that we have very limited time, we have 3 distinguished panelists who have been also working with us those of you who have also been listening to and going to different webinars that we have been having before and after the GBV is you are very familiar with them, and they will be able to bring some perspectives which are very important for us to have recommendations and way forward for the meeting in November. The first presenter will be Minnie Degawan. She's a Kananake from the Cordillera, Philippines, who has been an Indigenous rights activist for a long time at both local, global, and national level in her country. She followed the drafting of the UN DRIP, which is very crucial for us, worked for the adoption of the policies in ADP, World Bank, GEF, and GCF, all that in terms of looking and making sure that the recognition of Indigenous people as right is really included. She has also worked with different multi-stakeholders platforms as the Forest Stewardship Council, the Forest Dialogue, and others within discussions on Indigenous people, as I already talked about. She's also one of the co-leads of the International Indigenous Forum Resource Mobilization Working Group. So today we are going to really listen to her. She's recently accepted the director post of ReWorld of the Integrity Fund, so it's part of it. Our second presenter will be Ramson Karmushu, a member of the Resource IIFB Resource Mobilization Committee. He has been working with Impact for a long time as a research program officer and coordinating a lot of research, both at the community level, at the national and international level, and bringing all these issues together. And Ramson has also supported the Indigenous communities in Kenya in different ways, especially on designing, implementation, and participatory of data collection from different areas. And he has also, really worked very hard and brought up the issues of traditional knowledge and secured future for the Indigenous traditional knowledge, which is very crucial for our culture, our cultural diversity. And Viviana Figueroa is from Argentina. She's a Amaguaca Indigenous woman, has over 20 years of professional experience on traditional knowledge, Indigenous people's rights, and women's empowerment and rights. She's an international consultant and has been working with the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. She's also a very close and very strong member of Indigenous Women and Biodiversity Network, and currently also one of the members of the Indigenous and Local Knowledge Task Force of ICBES. So Viviana has a PhD, has been working a PhD in law and a degree in international public law from the University of Buenos Aires, Argentina. So you can see that diversity, and definitely with that we find that we have really good time in the next 20 minutes, 15 minutes. And I will open up to ask Minnie to start her presentation. You have about 6 minutes to present. And here you are, Minnie, please go ahead.
Thank you, Lucy. Good evening, everybody. As Lucy said, I am Minnie Degawan, and coming to you from the ancestral lands of my people from the Cordillera, Philippines. As Lucy said, I have recently joined ReWild, which is a non-government organization whose mission is to protect and restore the wild, as director of the Kawari Fund, which is the integrity fund for the carbon market. It is wonderful to see that there is now more focused interest in protecting forests, with many stakeholders joining the efforts. In recent years, there has been an increase in government pledges to reduce climate change and restore our ecosystems, with actual financial resources going to the protection of forests. But it will take more than money alone to ensure the protection of forests. It will take the knowledge of Indigenous peoples combined with the financial and technical support of NGOs, philanthropies, governments, and private companies. And this is why this conversation is very important. And we would like to remind everybody that among the most important aspects that should be taken into account when talking about forest governance is the traditional knowledge systems and values of Indigenous peoples. And I would like to give an example of this. In my community, we practice sugpon, which is the practice of creating a voluntary communal fund to undertake a common action for the good of the ili or community. This can be to establish forest firewalls, fixing waterways, or stone walls designed to protect communal grounds. The sugpon is an acknowledgement by the community members of the responsibility of stewarding resources to meet the needs of people. And it is also recognizing the different abilities of different people. So that is why there's the recognition of differentiated responsibilities. For Indigenous peoples, the forests need to be nurtured. For in sustaining forests, communities are also sustained. It is not surprising that where Indigenous peoples are thriving, so are the forests. And yet this simple fact is often overlooked. In the demand for carbon credits and soon biodiversity credits from nature-based solution grows, Indigenous peoples and local communities are being left out of the discussions. Tragically, this often results in the violation of Indigenous rights, the displacement of communities, and new rules over land and resources that local communities didn't agree to. Leaving out these critical voices also mean ignoring the knowledge and opinions of the most critical stakeholders. I recall a case from Thailand where an Indigenous Karen farmer was brought to court and is being fined $5,000 simply because he was practicing the traditional agriculture system in his farm. He was accused of causing climate change. And yet it is this very same practice that has ensured generations of Karen people food security while sustaining surrounding forests. This is a clear example of how the non-inclusion of Indigenous peoples in the creation of forest policies is more destructive than helpful. In the very recent past, such as during the CBD COP15, we heard many statements from governments and civil society organizations on the importance of Indigenous peoples and local communities in addressing climate change and biodiversity loss. But are these enough? No, because at the root of the issue is a continuing belief that Indigenous peoples and local communities are merely beneficiaries. They do not have the agency over the resources and must be held to conserve these. They are not capable of making decisions for themselves. In short, the legacy of colonialism continues. So what needs to happen? The IIFB has lobbied hard at the CBD to increase the amount of funding directed at actions by Indigenous people to meet the targets of the Kunming-Montreal framework. But it is not just a matter of increasing the amount of available funding. The quality of funding must also be guaranteed. Aside from ensuring that funding goes to actions that really address biodiversity loss instead of promoting perverse incentives, it also means enabling direct access by Indigenous peoples and local communities to such funding. Intermediaries, if needed, should be the choice of the Indigenous peoples and the communities and not by the funder. Additionally, the fund should be accessible to all IPs and LCs and not be biased for so-called high-value ecosystems. For example, the focus on tropical forests is causing an illusion that these are the only ecosystems that matter. Without doubt, reducing emissions from forest degradation and deforestation are important actions, but we need to make sure that Indigenous peoples are front and center of these initiatives. We have observed that funding for the necessary social and community processes related to RED projects has been very minimal. Funding to ensure the communities are able to exercise their right to free prior informed consent, to conduct community discussions, and to negotiate equitable benefit sharing mechanisms is often an afterthought. And yet it is these processes that are important to ensure that communities own these initiatives and therefore ensure their sustainability. And this is but one of the many examples of what needs to change in the funding discourse. Often there is money for consultants to deliver studies, but there is never enough to ensure that the community is truly engaged. Funds are often available for the hiring of consultants, but never for the knowledge holders. And this is what we mean by quality funding. We should not look at just the amount of carbon sequestered. the global biodiversity benefits, or the amount of income per household generated. We should look at the holistic picture and include how funding goes to strengthen community unity and identity. So when we say we need to reconnect international and national funding to Indigenous peoples for forest governance, this is what we mean. Unfortunately, in the ongoing discussions regarding a biodiversity trust fund, Indigenous peoples are again left out. The GEF is consulting only with governments. The traditional governance systems of Indigenous peoples with regards to natural resources has always been about the ili, or the community. It takes into consideration how each intervention affects the community, not just in the present, but also in the future and in the past. Such governance systems must be strengthened and integrated into today's discussions of forest conservation. So we are launching, hopefully tomorrow, the Kawari Fund, which we hope will provide funding for community actions to ensure that they will be able to participate effectively in RED initiatives. It will elevate the traditional values of Indigenous peoples in forest governance. And as this fund launches, my vision is that in true Sugpon style, we will together affirm and strengthen our commitment to support initiatives that promote the protection of forests while upholding the rights of Indigenous peoples. And I hope we will be part of this forest and climate initiative that is being discussed. In the end, life on our planet depends on the spirit of Sugpon, the collaboration of our global community. Yaman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minnie. And I know you're very passionate and very keen on this process to really go forward of having Indigenous people, getting their own funding directly. Ramson, please take the floor. You have only 5 minutes, 6 minutes, sorry. And we hope we keep to that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. As you can see, my name is Ramson Karmushu. I am from Kenya, a Maasai Indigenous community. And yeah, I think Lucy have presented my bio of where I've been and what I've been doing. Next slide.
This one, Ramson, or do you want? You're currently on mute, Ramson. Sorry, I might have muted you.
Sorry.
Instead of someone else.
I think you muted me wrong. Okay. So yeah, I think as we are talking about the forest globally, and I would want to base my presentation around Africa and Kenya, where I come from. And I think it has always been in discussions that biodiversity all over the world is reducing drastically. And it's the same actually in Africa. When you look at the presentation of my presentation, there is around 22.7% of forest cover in Africa. And from 1990 to 2010, there has been a loss of around 0.5% of forest cover. Next slide. I don't know if it's slow. Oh yeah. When you look at Kenya, it's the same case that's happening. In around 2002, there was around 6.2% of forest cover. And when you look at what we have up to around 2018, 5.9% of the country is under the forest cover. There are two maps here, one that shows where Kenya is in the map of Africa, and the other one which shows the distribution of forests. This is a very important map to me because you can see Kenya has different types of forest. It has mountainous type of forest, it has coastal, and you can see towards the southeast, and then it also has a distribution of forest which is not mountainous, and it's all there are forests that are mountainous and others are rangeland forests within rangelands. All these forests are important, and there is a reason why I had shown where the forests are distributed in Kenya. And all forests are important, as we can always say, all ecosystems are actually important, not only the forests. And I think when we discuss about forests, we should also take in of all ecosystems in general. Next slide. When we talk about forests, there are forests that are around national parks, national reserves, and there are also forests that are inhabited by communities, and they are the communities that are protecting these forests through their own traditional knowledge. And it's where they call home, it's where they have source of livelihood. With indigenous peoples and local communities, the forests that we occupy or we live in, we call them home, first of all, and we live in nature, and as I say, we live in nature, with nature, and by nature. It means everything to us. It is our world, and we really think that whenever we're talking about conservation of nature and forest and anything around biodiversity, indigenous peoples and local community must be recognized. And all the international processes, including like the Red Plus, the pledges, and everyone talking about conservation of forests, our actions matters, and our recognition to continue doing what we have been doing needs to be supported. And we always say the increment of forest or biodiversity conservation does not need to rethink on how the indigenous peoples have been doing it, but it should come in and support the indigenous peoples and local communities, how they have been doing this on in their own way without any kind of support. When you go to the next slide, you will see we are connected to nature in many different ways. As you can see, next slide, please. Yeah, you can see we have different kind of pictures. And the first picture will show around fruits that we have in nature. They are our source of food. And yeah, when you look at the second picture, it is a tree that maybe most of the people do not think that it's important. But those kind of trees, whenever we see them flowering or getting fruits, they may not be important, but we know how fertile the forest is and how we predict nature. Because of getting those fruits, we know maybe we are getting rain at this season. Rain is going to fail, and it means a lot. As you can also see, there are two men there who are trying to make fire. We get also fire from the same forest. We don't go for matchboxes from different places. It is a source of fire. So it's a source of food, and it also provides us with wood, which is specific also that we make fire from, and we cook our own food using the same fire. And you can also see another man there trying to hold some wood. He is actually making rope. So we don't use, like, a forest means everything to us, and we live together with wildlife. Of course, you can see livestock there living together with sheep. I mean livestock and wildlife. And at the end of the picture at the end, it also shows that we are connected spiritually. The small trees that you can, the tree that you can see and some kind of wood is a sign of prayer. That's where we go and do a lot, do prayers under the trees. They are all specific, all have got meanings. People will see the forest and think that it's just a carbon sink, but for us, it's not a carbon sink. It is a source of food. It is a home. It is medicinal. We are connected spiritually, and nature also talks to us. It shows us what season is coming, and it also makes us to prepare. When you see like some trees flowering, it could tell you like what to do next. And one example that I'm trying to show is a forest known as Mkogoro Forest. It has been over the years ranked in Kenya as the third best preserved forest in Kenya. And I think from 1999 up to now, there are quite a lot of forests that are so much degrading, but that forest has maintained is its own kind of being conserved. And the people are living inside that forest. They are the ones that are protecting it. Of course, they are using the forest. They are using it to feed their livestock and everything. But the thing is, they're using it sparingly, knowing that there is tomorrow. And they don't cut live trees. They cut branches of trees to feed their livestock and make sure that the tree is existing to the next season. Next slide. And so the effectiveness of conservation of forest, we still believe that our literal actions that people say literal are big and they matter. The indigenous traditional knowledge is very, very important and needs to be documented, needs to be promoted to continue supporting the science. And our own indigenous people's cultural attachment to the forest is also very, very important. And all the international frameworks, national frameworks, and funding streams should recognize all this and bring the indigenous peoples and local communities into the picture of conservation of forests going forward. Thank you very much. I think that's my end of this.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ramson. That was really, really good. And taking us inside the forest is really wonderful to see and to look at it and bringing the issues of indigenous knowledge. Quickly, let me go to Viviana. As indigenous people, we can never really have a time limit when we talk about our issues. So, but we do welcome you, and please go ahead, Viviana.
Muchas gracias, hermana Lucy. Quería comentarles, la próxima por favor, quería comentarles la experiencia en sí de Argentina en relación al tema del financiamiento y la gobernanza de los pueblos indígenas en relación con los bosques. Quería mencionarles que, bueno, que en Argentina hay 38 pueblos indígenas, una cantidad de 1.754 comunidades indígenas, y hay pueblos indígenas en todas las provincias de mi país. O sea, el porcentaje que se dice que es a nivel nacional es el 2.4% en relación a la población total. Próxima. Sin embargo, y por qué quería mostrarles estos datos generales, los bosques nativos en mi país se encuentran en los territorios de las comunidades indígenas. O sea, el 65% de comunidades indígenas de mi país está en bosques nativos, cuidando, protegiendo los bosques nativos. Y esto está evidenciado, que es un documento que el gobierno argentino publicó, que se llama Causas e Impactos de la Deforestación de los Bosques Nativos de Argentina en el año 2020, que evidencia claramente, ustedes van a ver que en las líneas donde están marcadas en color morado, son donde están las comunidades indígenas, y el rojo, el verde y el amarillo son bosques nativos que están en diferentes, digamos, como diferentes grados de protección, siendo la roja la protección más fuerte. O sea, hay una gran cantidad de comunidades indígenas que están en los bosques nativos, que son los más críticos y que conservan la biodiversidad. Próxima, por favor. En Argentina, en relación con el financiamiento, está la Ley Nacional de Bosques Nativos, que fue reglamentada por un decreto. Este es el número de la ley. Esta ley lo que hace es crear un Fondo Nacional para el Enriquecimiento y la Conservación de los Bosques Nativos. Lo que hace la ley es crear un mecanismo para compensar a los titulares de las tierras, o sea, los titulares de las tierras en donde están los bosques, por los servicios ambientales que brindan. Y el fondo lo que hace es dar a las provincias, y las provincias en sí exigen que los interesados en obtener esos fondos, que tienen que ser tienen que tener un título de propiedad sobre esas tierras, y tienen que tener un plan de manejo o un plan de conservación. Entonces, para hacer ese plan de manejo y de conservación, tiene que ser por un profesional habilitado. Esto quiere decir un ingeniero forestal, por ejemplo. y cuando presentan ese plan de conservación o de manejo, no necesariamente van a recibir los fondos, sino que tienen que tener una aprobación de parte de la provincia, y la provincia tiene que tener a su vez lo que es un ordenamiento de bosques nativos. Esas actividades o esos fondos pueden ser utilizados para el aprovechamiento forestal, para aprovechamiento de productos forestales o no madereros, para la conservación, para la restauración y recuperación en sí. Esos son algunos proyectos. Y he puesto en sí la fuente de donde está la información, que es el Ministerio de Ambiente, como para evidenciar puntos importantes, ¿no? Primero es que no todas las comunidades indígenas en mi país tienen título de propiedad. Esa es la primera, vamos a decir, la primera dificultad para acceder a los fondos. La segunda dificultad es que hay que hacer un plan de manejo, un plan de conservación. Y ese plan de manejo y conservación hay que pagar a un profesional para que lo haga. Y los costos no son menores, es un costo bastante elevado. Con lo cual, ese es la segunda dificultad para acceder a estos fondos. El tercero es que la provincia mismo tiene que aprobar ese plan de conservación y manejo. Por más que tenemos un estudio que muestra que las comunidades, el 65% está en los bosques nativos, y los está cuidando, los está preservando, entonces tiene que ser aprobado por la provincia. Con lo cual, en la práctica y en la realidad, esta Ley Nacional de Bosques Nativos, que es muy importante para nuestro país, sin embargo, el mecanismo que existe no considera la realidad de los pueblos indígenas y de las comunidades indígenas, pero sin embargo, las comunidades indígenas son las que mayormente están contribuyendo a la conservación de los bosques. La próxima. Por eso es que nosotros consideramos que es necesario que haya un lineamiento, ¿no? Tanto lo que son las decisiones internacionales como las políticas a nivel nacional, que contribuyan a que haya un mecanismo de acceso directo a los fondos, o sea, esta ley. O sea, a nivel internacional tenemos una meta que es la meta 19, a nivel nacional debería haber una política pública que conozca y considere la realidad de los pueblos indígenas para que accedan a los fondos, para que sigan contribuyendo a la conservación de los bosques. También te tiene que considerar que la propiedad y la posesión de las tierras de las comunidades indígenas también es propiedad de la tierra, y con lo cual también se le debe reconocer acceder a estos fondos, ¿no? Y también que los pueblos indígenas cuentan con sus propios técnicos e idóneos que pueden hacer sus propios planes de manejos sin contar con un profesional, que es bastante caro, ¿no? Por lo tanto, creemos que tanto a nivel internacional y nacional debe haber una conexión en lo que es mecanismos de financiamiento y también los sistemas de gobernanza, y que por supuesto los pueblos indígenas que conservan la biodiversidad tienen que ser los principales titulares de derecho para acceder a los financiamientos. Muchas gracias.
Muchas
Thank you very
gracias.
much, Viviana. Thank you very much, and thank you for those recommendations also. And I think both the panelists, you may all agree with me that they brought quite a number of issues, and really emphasizing on the importance of Indigenous people being the ones to really get the funding and try to protect and conserve our forest areas. And you have all heard that forests are everything to us. They're our health, they're the air that we breathe, as I said earlier, and so on. Now, I really want to thank the presenters very much. And I know that we have about 20 minutes before we move to the next session, but I would like to open and have a few people ask a few questions before we finalize this particular section. If you have any questions or any input that you want to put, but please not a presentation, only some input, some points that you would like to, or even ask our panelists. You are ready, and we'll be happy to see you raise your hand so that we can call upon you to speak and allow the technician to give you the microphone. And also you can write the questions. I think I'm already seeing some communication in the chat, but some of them are in Spanish, so maybe someone can pick them up. Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
perfect. Prune, if you see any hand up, please let's go ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lucy, for opening the floor for questions. So, Jose, you were the first one to raise your hand. Do you want to unmute yourself, present yourself, name, country, organization, and go ahead with your question? Thank you very much, Jose.
Sí, muy buenos días. Soy José Ancuash, ecuatoriano, y pertenezco al grupo indígena Shuar. Soy Shuar. Y yo sí, solamente quería hacer un comentario respecto a la exposición que hizo la última conferencista en torno a la participación de los pueblos indígenas. Y yo sí estoy de acuerdo en este punto sobre el fortalecimiento a los actores propios de los pueblos indígenas para acceder a los recursos existentes para la conservación. Pero existen actores locales en los territorios de los pueblos indígenas. Eso es muy importante fortalecerlos, porque muchos gobiernos, muchos ministerios delegan la ejecución de los proyectos de conservación a las ONGs de contextos sociales que no son de los pueblos indígenas. Estos actores, estas ONGs que no conocen el contexto sociocultural, una vez captados los fondos, intervienen en los territorios de los pueblos indígenas, se agotan los recursos, retornan. Entonces no hemos quedado los pueblos indígenas quedan sin su fortalecimiento. Pero si es que los organismos de cooperación identificaran a los propios actores territoriales de los pueblos indígenas y fortalecen en la tecnología, en su fortalecimiento organizacional, las intervenciones, las inversiones durarían de manera sostenida. Entonces los impactos positivos también perdurarían, se lograría los objetivos de conservación, la restauración de la biodiversidad y otros beneficios que son necesarios tanto para beneficio de los pueblos indígenas como para beneficio de la humanidad. Yo creo que es importante también, cuando se trata del tema de conservación, poner énfasis en los aspectos de restauración de los ecosistemas, en los bioemprendimientos o negocios verdes, en el fortalecimiento de los actores locales y en la conservación misma de los bosques que realmente existen. Entonces quisiera saber qué es lo que opinan en el aspecto del fortalecimiento de los actores propios de los pueblos indígenas que interactúan en los territorios. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I would really urge people to make it as short as possible, because we could have a number of key people. Martha, please. Martha Nuez from Ecuador.
Martha, do you mind putting yourself off mute?
Yes.
We can't hear you currently. Yeah. And if you want to put your video on as well, that would be helpful. You're having the floor.
Okay. Muchas gracias, excelentes los panelistas. Un gusto enorme verte, Lucy, y ver que estás facilitando este webinar. Tres cuestiones, una para cada uno de los panelistas. Me pareció muy interesante lo que Minnie mencionó sobre los incentivos perversos, es decir, que algunos financiamientos a la larga o a la corta se convierten en incentivos perversos, y eso es muy importante de tomar en cuenta porque, por supuesto, en lugar de contribuir a la conservación, están contribuyendo a la deforestación, a la conversión, etcétera. Y esto también me relaciona con algo que Ramson mencionó, que también es muy importante, y es el hecho de que él dijo que no solamente los bosques de Kenia son importantes, sino otros ecosistemas. Y creo que eso deberíamos ponernos a pensar para realmente tratar de que se definan políticas y se definan mecanismos a través de los cuales nosotros podamos hacer una planificación territorial más integral, y dentro de ese contexto pedir el financiamiento no solamente para uno u otro elemento de la naturaleza, sino precisamente para una conservación con carácter integral. Él mencionó también, o Minnie mencionó, que no solamente los bosques tropicales son importantes. Por supuesto que sí, no solamente el carbón es importante. Me pareció excelente lo que dijeron. Y por último, para Viviana, tengo la preocupación desde el otro día sobre el tema de que en la provincia de Mendoza, el pueblo mapuche ha sido, digamos, excluido de los pueblos aborígenes de Argentina. Me pregunto de qué manera han respondido los demás pueblos indígenas a esta resolución de Mendoza, y si es que esta resolución de la provincia de Mendoza tiene que ver directamente con el despojo de los territorios o el desconocimiento de los territorios indígenas en esa provincia. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Martha. Now, let's go to Viviana. You have two questions, one on the issues of ecosystem restoration and the one of Mendoza. And Minnie, and then Ramson. Let's start with Viviana.
Muchas gracias, querida Lucy y Marta, por la pregunta. En el caso específicamente de la situación del pueblo mapuche Mendoza, está en conflicto judicial y político. Lamentablemente en Argentina no tenemos una ley nacional que reconozca los derechos a la tierra. Sí, los derechos a la tierra están reconocidos en la Constitución, pero no ha sido una ley específica y ha sido un proceso muy complejo y lento, la titulación colectiva de las tierras indígenas, con lo cual el tema actualmente se encuentra en un proceso judicial, digamos. Y por otro lado, bueno, comentarles de que en realidad existe documentos y una cantidad enorme de resoluciones del gobierno reconociendo la existencia del pueblo mapuche, con lo cual el pueblo mapuche está más que reconocido. Muchas gracias. Esa creo que era la pregunta más que estaba dirigida a mí. Gracias.
Yes, that's the one. Would you like to comment about the restoration with the first, Jose had asked about the ecosystem restoration and the efforts by Indigenous people. And maybe you would just like to add and say that Indigenous people are already playing a big role with the UN, FAO, and the team in the UN on the UN ecosystem restoration initiatives and so on. Please go ahead, Viviana, 1 minute.
Sí, gracias. En relación a esto, sí, por supuesto es importante que empoderar a los pueblos indígenas como actores principales para que sean los que reciban los fondos, los gestionen y los utilicen, pero a su vez también es importante generar las políticas públicas y generar también lo que son los marcos legales, ¿no? Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. Ramson, please. Do you have any addition on what Martha has said? 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I had one question, which is around financing ecosystems. And I was saying financing ecosystem does not really need to be like dividing ecosystems and finding. And I think to the fundings that we are seeing, like the pledge on 1.7, it was one fund that was coming to support tropical rainforest. But when you look at the fund also, it is again divided, yeah, it's going to the forest, yes, but along the tropical rainforest, and again dividing the tropical rainforest to certain kind of meters above the sea level. For us, we see all ecosystems are good. And by the time we all concentrate on certain areas, it's actually very dangerous, because the other whole land is depleting and people will be moving to the small areas that you are securing and continue to deplete everything. So the best way to maintain ecosystems is to maintain all ecosystems, to make sure that everything is working the same. When you are not maintaining rangelands, people will be moving into the forest toward the forest all the time to live there and vandalize everything. Like it will be the source of everything that they need. But when they have an option where the rangeland forest are conserved well, then they don't need to go to the tropical rainforest and make them strain in terms of supporting the whole kind of community and ecosystem. So all ecosystems are important, because when you concentrate on one, you will be moving the whole pressure to the one that you're conserving more.
Thank you.
So I think
Minnie?
funding should be distributed to cover all ecosystems.
Okay, Minnie?
Yes, very short. Just to make sure that when I talk about perverse incentives that contribute to forest conversions, this is happening all over, with the support of governments to agricultural production, which are essentially plantations, which are indeed resulting to forest conversion. So again, when we talk about funding and looking at forests, we have to, as we have all said, holistic view, inclusion of the people who are dependent on these forests, making sure that it's inclusive. Let us not create divisions between tropical and temperate forests. We are all in one earth, and what happens in one forest affects one forest. So in this spirit of we are all citizens of the earth, the call is to listen to Indigenous voices, support the Indigenous actions on the ground. And I thank you very much for having us in this very important discussion. Yeah.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you. Elena, please, you had your hand up earlier. Do you want to still ask a question? Guima, Elena?
Just check if Elena is still with us, because
Yeah, I see her in.
Guiomar.
Yes, Guiomar.
Ajá.
I couldn't pronounce
Guiomar
that.
Elena.
Yeah.
Ah, ok. Sí, buenas, saludos para todos y todas. En Venezuela se ha dado una experiencia interesante de una concesión al pueblo indígena Cariña en una reserva forestal. Entonces allí ellos, en lugar, indudablemente, aplicando todo su conocimiento, lo que han hecho básicamente es sembrar más árboles y aprovechar los productos del bosque, ¿sí? Esa experiencia es muy interesante porque se dio a través de una concesión. Y es en Venezuela por lo menos, es una experiencia única, porque no se trata de un territorio indígena, sino de la concesión de una parcela de manejo de bosque. Quería hacer ese comentario y además decir lo siguiente. Hay en Venezuela por lo menos, el tema de los planes de manejo, la responsabilidad es del Estado. Sin embargo, en ese aspecto también hace falta mecanismos de mayor participación de los pueblos indígenas. En ese sentido, se utiliza la consulta previa e informada como parte de los mecanismos. Pero como sabemos, Venezuela ha atravesado unas dificultades en el ámbito político y económico, pero eso ha mermado un poco la capacidad del Estado para atender algunas realidades. Y entonces en este momento hace falta un fortalecimiento de otras fuentes de financiamiento para avanzar sobre el tema del fortalecimiento de las experiencias locales de los pueblos indígenas. De hecho, que fue un punto en el informe que presentó, en este caso fue el Gobierno Nacional, sobre la afectación de los derechos humanos de la aplicación de las sanciones de la cual ha sido objeto el Estado venezolano. Pero bueno, sin embargo, a pesar de eso, en lo que es esta experiencia, la ha concebido el Estado junto con la FAO. Ese comentario lo hice en el cuestionario anterior acerca de lo legal. Así que quería compartir eso un poco porque en contraste con Argentina, el Estado tiene la responsabilidad, sin embargo, eso no garantiza que se puedan hacer los planes por las diferentes dificultades que puede atravesar cualquier gobierno, pues en este caso. Quería hacer este comentario y que bueno, veo que es sumamente importante este tema de la conexión de lo que es el financiamiento con las iniciativas locales directamente de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Elena, and thank you very much, everyone. This has really been a wonderful discussion, and I wish we had more time to be able to open further and have a discussion. I know many people are still holding on to many things that they have, but I want to thank all the panelists and also for the participants to be here. To have 75 of you here is really a great opportunity, and I think I will wind up this way to thank you all and to hand over to Prune to continue to the next step and the next session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And apologies, Namki, and for the other people who actually have asked some questions on the chat. Thank you very much, Lucy, for closing that first topic. Unfortunately, we had to cut it short, but please, Ramki, please fill in the feedback form so we could actually cover the question and come back to you on it as for the other ones, because we don't want to forget you and just move to the next topic. We're just really conscious of time because of the fact that we have to move to the other two topics with Lina, myself, and Elena. I hope you don't mind, Namki. So as Lucy mentioned, I'm going to move to the next topic. So I'm just going to share my screen again. Let me just do a bit of a switch off presentation. Right, I'm hoping that everyone can see my screen again. If somebody can actually tell me that that I am sharing my screen. Right, perfectly on time. Thank you so much, Lucy. So first of all, thank you everyone for the great participation on the topic of reconnecting international and national funding and governance to IPLCs for forest conservation. And thank you very much for the great questions from yourself, Jose, Elena, and Martha. Thank you so much. Namki, as I said, please, and for everyone else who were really wanting to actually ask your question, I know we had to cut it short, but as there are other questions that were missed, please do not hesitate to let us know via the feedback form as usual. We're really trying to stick to the timing, and apologies. So now it is time for us to start on the second half of the webinar to talk about the two products that we hope to release in November, based on all information received during and after the webinars. Those two products are, as you know, the Policy Brief and the Roots Toolkit. Lina, on my side, will cover the Policy Brief, and apologies, just a bit of technical apologies. So Lina on my side will cover the Policy Brief and I will cover the toolkit. We will be joined by Elena Kreuzberg from the Global Forest Coalition, who has been a great support on all webinars so far and who will draft the Policy Brief and the toolkit. So thank you very much, Elena, for being with us. As previously mentioned and conscious of time, it is our aim to gather your thoughts, your feedback, and your expectations on both projects. It's 4 o'clock in Paris time, so we will try to spend 15 minutes on the policy brief and about 30 to 40 minutes on the Grassroots Toolkit. We're going to try to make it all in English because we don't have the feedback from the translation from our room. So if you do have loads of questions in Spanish, please forgive me. I don't speak Spanish personally, and Lina's Spanish is as poco as mine. So we are welcoming any question. We do have a colleague of us on our side to be able to translate, but I think it'll be putting her too much on the spot, I think. So let's try to keep the topic in English. So Lina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Prune, and it really is a pleasure to see so many of you online for this last FCI webinar and for this discussion on the two products that we hope to release during our first conference in Monaco in November. So we have put some initial thoughts on the policy brief, on the format and content of it on this slide, as you can see. And these are largely inspired by the conversation we have had during the 3 webinars organized in the past month. So this is very new. It will most certainly evolve in the coming months leading up to the conference, but we do hope that it will help getting us started for this brief initial conversation. So as Prune said, we will start with the policy brief. We are looking just to give you an idea of what have been discussed so far. So we are looking at a short document, 4 to 8 pages maximum, with kind of a glossy, attractive design, let's say, with very clear and concise language, non-technical as much as possible. And it would really be to dig out the high-level messages, the most important recommendations that we would like to convey from the webinars and from the conference itself. So who's the audience for this document? We think that it should be policy and decision makers. It should be a global international audience, but also potential donors for forest conservation work, as we of course, and as we have discussed just now, there is many gaps and resources are crucially missing in this space. So the objective of the policy brief is for sure a bit high level with the messages and main outcomes from the webinars again, but we also would like it to be a very useful and practical tool, a practical resource that will help local actors to highlight and bring these challenges and recommendations to the decision makers. So it should really be seen as a tool for Indigenous people, local communities, and all the other actors on the ground who actively work to protect and conserve forests. So it means with this, it's my pleasure to hand over now to Elena and to provide a short introduction or an analysis from the previous webinars, and then we will have some time for discussion at the end. So Elena, thank you.
Thank you very much, Lina. Thank you to all participants who join us today. I also would like to thank Lucy and all panelists from today's session, which was very inspiring. And this is an extremely vital opportunity to talk today about urgency of the policy brief on the IPLCs issues. And these urgencies is dictated by the global recognition of the important roles and contributions of Indigenous people and local communities as guardians of biodiversity and partners in conservation, as it was underlined in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, negotiated at the COP15 in Montreal in December 2022. The other important documents adopted during the meeting, Resource Mobilization Strategy and the Agreement to Share the Benefits, also highlighted the significance of capacity building and development, scientific and technological cooperation and technology transfer, encouraging parties to support Indigenous people and local communities, as well as relevant stakeholders, with stressing the capacity needs and priorities for women. What are crucial points at the new GBF that provide us the instruments to build a roadmap for actions? First, this is a recognition of Indigenous and women's rights reflected in Kunming-Montreal 2030 global targets. The rights and contributions of IPLCs were respected in many targets. It is also important to mention that for the first time, the indigenous and traditional territories were recognized in the global network of protected areas as their own territories, as ICCAs and as OECMS, ensuring their sustainable use and valuing the rights of IPLCs, and underlining the main principles of territorial biodiversity protection as effectively conserved and equitably governed. Finally, the importance of recognizing women's rights and contributions highlighted in the independent target on gender ensures women's participation in decision-making related to GBF implementation. The Gender Action Plan, adopted at COP15, contains a comprehensive set of guidelines to mainstream gender in all biodiversity-related decisions and implementation mechanism. So we have a framework in which execution depends on many factors and circumstances, but all support the IPLC's active participation and engagement. We need to find a way to forward to implement the targets at the national and local level. We need instruments and resources for implementation. We need mechanisms to support IPLCs. And then we can expect that the targets of GBF will be achievable. Forest and biodiversity protected and management in the comprehensive and fair way, with participation of all who depend on forest and biodiversity resources in their life. I assume that we need feedback from all participants that to reflect the real message to all interested stakeholders, including donors and governments. And this is how to say our introduction to you, what we would like to share with the policy makers and other stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Elena, and for really the overview of the situation with the GBF and the momentum around it. So just to shortly summarize what we have on the screen here, we have 6 recommendations put together from the previous webinars. Obviously, this is just the start. Again, it's not the final messaging, but these are some ideas to again launch the discussion. So just reading them quickly here, we have, for example, the integration of indigenous traditional forest-related knowledge in national policies. We have highlighted the opportunity to capitalize on the current momentum around the global biodiversity framework, especially the targets you can see here on the screen, to empower communities and advance biodiversity conservation. We have the integration of roles of IPLC's international biodiversity strategies and action plan through this process, to involve IPLCs early on in decision-making and policy in forest biodiversity conservation. The forest conservation policies that need to be based on gender just and right-based approaches, so to be equitable, inclusive, and participatory. And we need to promote science-based monitoring and adapted technologies complemented by traditional knowledge. So those are kind of some of the ideas coming out from the 2 previous webinars, and it doesn't take account what we just heard this today in the other in this final webinar, but we have some nice ideas and recommendations to be added for this conversation on connecting funding and how we need to make sure that funding trickles down essentially to the communities, to IPLCs, which is not always the case today. So with that, I would like to open the floor for around 5 to 10 minutes, maybe, Prune, for everyone, and to give us your thoughts if you feel there is anything else critical on top of your heads that could be included or amended, maybe. And please also remember again that if we don't have time today to discuss, this is a very living process. So we will, you have the survey, the opportunity to add any thoughts into the survey, and then we will consult the community regularly. So do we have any?
So do we have anyone on the floor Martha, amazing. Thank you very much for raising your hand. Is it okay if you're doing it in Spanish or otherwise in English, please? Otherwise, Miriam will be here to be able to translate as much as the translators will do for the floor. Martha, over to you.
Thank you. And sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Marta Núñez from Ecuador. I am a member of the SEDEMA, which is the organization who gathers many NGOs, environmental and social organizations from Ecuador. I will try to do my best. My English is quite bad.
Perfect.
Thank you very much indeed for the idea of preparing this policy brief. Thank you, Elena, for your observations. Reading the recommendations, of course, you are saying that we could include some other points and reflect on those. I think that it's quite important to include something that was discussed in the previous webinar regarding law. Some of the panelists or the presenters or the participants says that the laws, the forest laws are quite old now. They have to be updated, for instance. And also it was important to say that the forest laws are have to be how do you say supported or integrated in or included in a good governance, which means the institutions and in this kind of good governance, taking into account that the other laws and other policies at the national levels are almost contradictory to the forest laws. That is why we have convention, and we used to say that the causes of deforestation are outside the forest, not inside the forest. So I think this is quite important to introduce this or to include this in this policy brief. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Martha. Actually, you're completely right. What Justice Antonio has said on the last webinar has been critical. So we will make sure that we are including that as part of the toolkit. So thank you very much. And thank you very much for reminding so much on that second webinar. So next person who actually raised his hand was Brian. Brian, lovely to see you again on our webinars. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very, very much. And wonderful to be in this webinar as well. The discussions of all three have really been fantastic. So thanks very much for getting us all together for this. And I would just say, first of all, I think the 6 points for these recommendations are very, very good. They're all very, very important topics, and very important to get these out to all of the sort of target stakeholders that you mentioned. And at the risk of saying, oh, and one more thing, I'm just thinking about carbon markets and the issue of community carbon rights, because we're seeing so much emphasis, both in terms of the intergovernmental carbon markets, RED Plus and so on, and the voluntary carbon markets. There's so much emphasis and so much money, quite frankly, coming into these processes. And these processes have, let's say, at least the possibility to be much less transparent and not fit into national legal frameworks where there should be adequate protections and rights protected for IPLC communities. And I think this is something, I don't want to say this is a danger and be dramatic, but I think it's very important that we look at this issue carefully and make sure that carbon markets are implemented in a way that strengthen IPLC communities rather than create extra challenges.
Thank you very much, Brian, for your comment. It's very important. And I see that perhaps we do not have a very important 7 points, which is relevant to financing of the IPLC's initiatives. And I think that we need, based on today's conversation, we need to add one more point, which is related to this issue. And yes, the REDD+, it's very questionable, very controversial issue, which is still need more analysis. And the mechanism of benefits sharing is not clear in the REDD+, I'm sure. Thank you very much for your comment.
Yeah. Good.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you so much. So we have another question from Roxanne. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Roxanne Bose, and I work with the Baka Indigenous people in Cameroon, who unfortunately couldn't be here in the capital to participate. So I'm talking a bit on their behalf. What I would like to say is that based on the kind of work we've been doing, we run, which is mainly on collaborative research projects with the Baka. And in terms of recommendation, I was thinking something that we've been having to think about and deal with is that in order to be able to include Indigenous people more in sort of the biodiversity conservation sector, what we've been trying to work on is on trying to improve the vocabulary, or sort of help and make sure that they have the vocabulary and the skills to communicate with those who are making these policies and who are managing a lot of the parks, so that they can really fully participate, because their worldview is different, but there are still many things in common in terms of, the ecological interactions and a lot of the stuff. But just so that, we share, there's a back and forth between the two ways of, I guess, knowledge systems, so that, we can speak to each other better. So I would say, and even, looking into sort of more educational opportunities and that sort of stuff, connecting them with, I think that for me, that's one of the really important things that one has to think about. Thank you.
That's a really good point. And they're realizing, yes, we do need to have something more on capacity building, which is not really, but again, these were just the first very first thoughts, but yes, this is a very, very good point indeed. Do we have any other questions on the policy? Yes, Wolfgang.
Okay, hello. My name is Wolfgang Kuhlmann. I'm working for the Global Forest Coalition, and I would like to just point to the importance of especially land rights, Indigenous people's land rights. I think this is a really crucial point that is at the very center of all, let's say, initiatives to protect biodiversity and to protect the rights of Indigenous peoples. And I think there are many countries where land rights are not granted yet. There are some positive examples, but a lot of very negative ones as well. And we see from experience that these land rights are very important as well to stop, let's say, the taking over of the land by other drivers of deforestation, be it forestry, be it large-scale agriculture or anything else. So I would very much also stress the point that Marta made, that it is very important to keep this in focus as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for that, actually. Wolfgang, it's an absolute pleasure to actually meet you and put a face on a name, because I know we've been exchanging on emails previously. So we'll definitely actually add that following the second webinar that we had. It was a theme that we also had that we couldn't actually cover in the 6 recommendation, but we'll definitely have this included. So thank you so much for that suggestion. Lina, did we have anyone else on Elena? Did you? Oh, we do have Richard on.
Before Richard,
do you want to add anything, Elena? Yeah, sure.
Yes, I just would like to tell that a right-based approach will be covered in the point 5, which is a relevant forest conservation policy based on gender just and right-based approach. equitable, inclusive, and participatory, and will cover issues related to land tenure right in this issue. Thank you very much for your opinion, for your suggestions, Wolfgang. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on to Richard, you were the first one, well, the next one to actually raise your hand.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. Let me say hello to everyone. I am Richard Hansson. I work for the Sustainable Development Institute, located Liberia, West Africa. So we usually work with local communities relating to implementing the new land rights law that was passed in 2018, forest governance and community and rights. Yeah, these points are very good recommendations, and in addition with other points my colleagues made, but I would like to add one point that sometimes we usually forget about. It may not be included here, but the media actually plays an important role in raising awareness, also raising the red flags and a lot of other issues. So we should not forget about the media, which is very instrumental in visibility of most of the recommendations here and most of the issues we work on in ensuring that communities' rights are protected, forest rights, and we ensure good governance. So the media is a major component we should also think of.
Yes, extremely good point. Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Richard. And then we had, although we had one. Do you want to ask?
There was someone else who just raised their hand, but perhaps it was the same point as for Richard. But Juana just came back with her hand raised. Thank you, Juana, for coming back.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I put down my hand because it was the same issue as the former, but I would like to stress this issue of race-based approach. Sometimes it's a big approach and we forget some things, like Wolfgang was talking about this land right, but don't forget also the water rights. That is because usually sometimes water right is overlooked. Even when we have land, but we don't have water, then is everything files. We don't biodiversity files, biodiversity conservation files. So this is we should really, at least on basic resources like land, water, seeds, we should include in this, should be clearly visibilized in that policy brief. And yeah, I see also you include gender, just and right-based approach. Yeah, this issue is crucial because also gender is a big word, but maybe we should also go into more deep, like the intersectional approach. By saying intersectional, we are also talking not about only women, but also indigenous women and indigenous men from colors and also from different identities. So this is also an important issue we should include in that brief. And for the rest, I agree with the other recommendations. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Hannah. That's really helpful. And Namki, this will be the last comment on the policy brief. Then we'll need to move on the toolkit. But Namki, please go ahead.
Hola.
Hi, we can hear you well.
Sí.
But now you're on mute. So I'm not touching anything to mute you. So you're currently on mute. You're unmuted. So go ahead. Namki, do you want to go ahead?
Sí, hola.
Go ahead, Namki. We can hear you now.
Maybe we'll just go on then and bring you back later on, Namki, for the other discussion. I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think there's a technical issue, Namki. You're going off mute and on mute, so we can't hear you, unfortunately. Do you want to go ahead for last try?
Hello. Hola, sí.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hey, ¿cómo están? Primeramente, recibo un cordial saludo. Soy de Ecuador. Mi nombre es Nanki, de los pueblos indígenas de Shuar. Es importante los temas, tema de ambiental. En Ecuador nosotros sufrimos mucho tema de explotación petrolera. Los pueblos indígenas sufrimos de eso, también el tema de la minería en Ecuador es muy fuerte, donde que los gobiernos de turno no respaldan nuestras decisiones, no hacen la consulta previa, libre e informada en Ecuador. Es importante que las cooperaciones ONG también de otros países que nos puedan ayudar a buscar nuestros problemas que tenemos en contaminación, nuestro ambiente, nuestros territorios, en los pueblos indígenas de Ecuador. Realmente somos bien olvidados del tema de los gobiernos de turno, porque nosotros hemos tenido muchos enfrentamientos con los grandes gobiernos aquí en Ecuador por tema de derrame de petróleo. Se ha contaminado los territorios, los ríos y la alimentación para los pueblos indígenas es muy fuerte en Ecuador, que realmente incluso también está la minería a gran escala en Ecuador, en los territorios, en los pueblos indígenas que nos aíslan y nos asesinan y nos meten presos por defender nuestros territorios. Y por eso necesitamos esa ayuda, que también los cooperantes de ONG también, que sea directamente con los pueblos indígenas, los ayuda, que se hace directo, no a través de las ONGs, porque los intermediarios se quedan los recursos y no llegan en las comunidades, en los pueblos indígenas que realmente necesitan los niños por tema de derrame de petróleo. Hay enfermedades que se han contaminado mucho a los niños en el río, en el agua también. Es importante analizar esos temas que en Ecuador sufrimos y también fortalecer los emprendimientos comunitarios en los pueblos indígenas, fortalecer porque tenemos mucha biodiversidad, mucha cultura, como los pueblos indígenas que somos de Ecuador. Tenemos nuestras tradiciones, nuestras costumbres, y también conservamos el bosque, porque el bosque, nosotros vivimos eso en Ecuador, realmente somos el pulmón de la Amazonía, que damos oxígeno, tenemos la biodiversidad. Hoy en día, ¿qué pasa? El cambio climático en el mundo, los grandes inversionistas que contaminan, nosotros conservamos ese ambiente. Y también sería importante que también tomen en cuenta eso en este espacio que se nos da para próximas, ir analizando, ver emprendimientos comunitarios y así dar pequeños incentivos a los pueblos indígenas, los que tenemos pequeños económicos, recursos para poder acceder a todos estos espacios, porque en sí el gobierno de Ecuador no nos apoya en estos emprendimientos, en estas decisiones que nosotros tomamos en los pueblos indígenas. No somos tomados en cuenta con el gobierno. El gobierno de Ecuador solo nos asesina, nos aísla a un lado como que fuéramos no parte de la sociedad común. Entonces sería muy importante que las cooperaciones de ONG directamente se puedan tomar en cuenta a los pueblos indígenas, tomar estas decisiones en los territorios, porque no a través de las ONG. Las ONGs son que captan los fondos de los pueblos indígenas, entonces se queda entre ellos en territorio. Los pueblos indígenas nunca llega a nada, solo llega unas migajas, pequeños porcentajes. Eso un poco de detalles. Muchas gracias, un abrazo fraterno.
Muchas gracias, Namki. This is as far as my Spanish goes. we will include that, but just conscious of time. Is there anything you want to say very briefly, Elena, before we move to the
I just would like to tell regarding the last comments. They cover everything. They cover human rights issues. These comments from Namki covers also environmental defenders, exploitation activities, environmental pollutions, and human rights. So everything in one package. Yes, what we try to do in our recommendations, we try to make clear points on each issue, cover them, and probably also clarify each issue on the specific points. So thank you very much for your comments, and yes, hope that we'll be able to share with all our community the draft of the recommendations, which will include not only the general described issues, but details, more details. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So I do apologize for people who, so Namki, thank you so much for that participation, even though we were struggling to hear you, but I think we captured everything. Apologies for the people who do have some question on text, on messages, and Patrice, I know you have raised your hand, but I'm really sorry, it's 32 past. We do have to talk about a third and last topic. So as mentioned before by Lina, there will be an opportunity for you to actually give your thoughts on the policy brief content and suggestion and expectation via the feedback form as usual. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for all of your question, Namki, Juana, Brian, Martha, Rusco, Richard, Wolfgang. I'm pretty sure that I missed someone for your feedback. And as I said, for all of the other ones who did not have the opportunity to actually speak, apologies about that. We are just going to move on to the second product that we hope to deliver for the conference, which is the Roots Toolkit. So compared to the policy brief, which will be much more high level, the toolkit we are developing will be a much more practical document in a way. So of course, the two products are very intertwined in terms of content, but we do hope that, the IPLCs will be able to use both. As you actually think, as you mentioned, actually, Namkin, I think if I understood your Spanish comment, we need to make sure that we do listen to IPLCs and we're actually having their voice. So we are really hoping that IPLCs will be able to use both the toolkit and the policy brief, helping you in the forest conservation and the international debate following the conference in November. So from the conversation we had, during the webinars and the feedback received post each of them, we would have in mind to have a proposed outline with those 6 sections. So a first part, that will be the importance of forest conservation by IPLCs. As we all know around that call, I'm pretty sure, everyone knows that IPLCs represent 5% of the global population, but they are looking after 80% of the global biodiversity. So as Elena mentioned earlier, it's hugely important and we need to actually act quickly. A second section will cover the vision over horizon, which would give an overview of what has been the vision agreed a few months ago in the Global Biodiversity Framework in Montreal, together with the action plan on how it can be achieved realistically and the potential challenges for those achievements. Like Elena mentioned earlier on the policy brief, those are actually called the targets. A third section will be on the current challenges for IPLCs, and the meat to the bone will be on the 4th section with an overview and all resources gathered on the 4 themes we discussed during the webinars. I'll leave it to Elena to talk a bit more about those 2 in a moment before we're actually going through that. Then the last section of our proposed outline will be from this overview and the resource, a fifth section on what IPLCs can do, and a final one, apologies, I missed my words, on the recommendation for government, business, and civil society organization. We thought that this outline will be produced in a document that we want to keep simple, fitting within 15 to 20 pages. I know what you're going to say. It's a real challenge, I know, but we'll be able to achieve that thanks to all of you who may want to actually be involved. And I think some of you on the call, Matt, Richard, I don't forget that you suggested that you were happy to help. So anyone is actually more than welcome to help us in producing that. In terms of how we will get those information and the findings on the 4 themes in particular, those obviously will come from the information received during the webinars from our great panelists, and thanks to all of the questions and comments raised during those sessions, sorry. But also thanks to the suggestion that you provided via the feedback form. Every time I have sent that, we do have quite a lot of feedback and suggestion, so thank you. I want to thank you all again for those who have done so already, but for the ones who didn't, please actually add those suggestions via the feedback form. We also hope to articulate those findings through case studies, for example, and some additional research. So to get to the real topic, with the playback on our to you all, and hearing from the person who is actually helping us draft the policy brief and the grassroots toolkit. Elena, I will switch back to you in terms of giving an overview for the 2 important topic of the toolkit, which are the current challenges for IPLCs in forest conservation, and also some of the key messages we took on the 4 themes.
Thank you very much, Prune. I appreciate it. And I also would like to thank to all contributors who asked their questions during the previous webinars and who sent their feedback on for the questionnaires which were sent out. Our task today, today's conservation, to answer several related questions. First of them, it's what is the vision of IPLCs on their role in the forest conservation and related GBF implementation process. GBF, in our case, it's a tool to achieve our goals. What are priorities, including regional priorities, which we talked about during our webinars, that regions have different priorities. How to inform and involve the governments, politicians, civil society organizations, donors, business, other national and international stakeholders that to ensure equitable, inclusive, effective, and gender responsive representation and participation of IPLCs in decision making. On our webinars, the participants rose the number of questions related to existing problems that IPLCs face in forest conservation and management. Let's try to review and analyze the current challenges and find out the ways to solve the problems. Let's group all challenges in several clusters, as it was delivered by our participants during previous webinars. Perhaps we'll forget something, but it's the time when you can contribute and tell us what we need to clarify more precisely. We group all questions in 4 clusters in following orders. The first, it's integration the GBF into the national planning process related to CBD commitments and BSAPs. It does not involve yet the IPLC's active participation, as we heard during our webinars. We need to find appropriate tools for dialogues between governments and IPLCs, including sharing the roles to avoid overlapping in the management of protected areas, where IPLCs engage it and empower rights for such management. Involvement of IPLCs into an NBSAP's process will strengthen the GBF implementation mechanism at the national level. The second issue and challenges. It's over-exploitation of resources, high rates of poverty, and the adverse effects of climate change in combination with pandemics impacted effectiveness of IPLCs in their conservation efforts. Recognizing the values of traditional knowledge and importance of its integration in sustainable management of biodiversity, there is a need in innovative solutions to improve conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, considering socio-economic and cultural context. There is a need to empower IPLCs with modern tools and technologies, which will strengthen abilities of local organizations in their biodiversity protection and sustainable management efforts, considering the need for survival without increased pressure on resources. Best practice sharing with positive examples of community-based forest management and other sustainable practices will support the implementation. The third issue, which was even highlighted today, it's the law. And presenters of a very fruitful environmental law webinar shared the advanced ideas and thoughts on law in forest conservation. It highlighted issues of land sharing between indigenous people and local communities, forest governance through recognition of the customary law, existing contradictions between forest legislation and policies in the different sectors at the national level, and other important issues. At the same time, participants declared about lack of instruments to involve IPLCs in the formulation of conservation law and public policies on forest conservation. It would be beneficial to include examples of case studies across regions where communities have been successful in using litigation strategies to secure tenure and land titles, covering regional mechanisms to provide solutions, the challenges of lack of implementation, and the opportunities to overcome challenges, for instance, through task forces and implementation plan initiated by IPLCs presented to governmental bodies. And the fourth issue, it's participants of webinars highlighted issues of indigenous women access for biodiversity and forest governance and lack of tools for women involvement in decision-making. They also underlined that colonial forest management vanished traditional and the customary rights of forest people. There is a need to enable communities' forest governance and collective rights over forest land and forest resources, including women's access to land, resources, and decision-making process. A gender plan of actions adopted at the COP15 of the CBD provides a set of tools that can be used by IPLCs to integrate gender-just community conservation approach in conservation strategies and implementation mechanism. So, based on the analysis of these challenges, we selected 4 main areas to be clarified in the toolkits, which you can see on the screen as the key messages and useful resources. So the first area, the first message, it's effective forest conservation methodology for IPLCs. And we think about enriching the modern technologies by application of traditional knowledge and practices used by IPLCs, community consultations, biocultural protocols, and other instruments. We think about training, platforms for knowledge sharing and education, forums, and other tools to share the modern technologies and to see how we can integrate the local knowledge in the implementation tools. Participatory inclusive spatial planning, respecting the rights of IPLCs. It's also one of the tools which could be used. The second message, it's right-based and gender-responsive approach in forest conservation. And it's include translation of GBF into NB subs in an effective way that will provide opportunities for equitable, inclusive, and participatory involvement of indigenous peoples and local communities. Building equal opportunities and capacities based on communication, education, and awareness will help implementation of this right basis and gender responsive approach. And the third message is the use of environmental law for forest conservation. And this, we need to have commitment to secure IPLC rights over biodiversity on land and territories, including support mechanism and enabling conditions in accordance with the GBF, case studies, best practices, and lessons learned, because in some cases, there is already good examples how environmental laws work positively for the engagement of indigenous communities in management of their territories on the sustainable ways. And the last is reconnecting national, international funding and governments to IPLCs for forest conservation. And this will include consultation with IPLCs to provide funds based on the real needs, ensuring forest biodiversity, sustainable management and conservation and well-being for communities. And also it will include access to available resources, consideration of different options. So that's all what we would like to highlight today. And of course, we need your feedback that to be more precise in the drafts of the grassroots toolkit. Thank
Absolutely.
you for your attention.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Elena, for those highlights. Quite a lot of material, but we actually tried to summarize, and you did quite a good job in terms of summarizing the 4 webinars that we just had. So thank you so much for the recommendation on what we took away from them. So now, as Elena mentioned, we'd like to open the floor. We thought that it'll be for 20 to 30 minutes, but actually seeing the time, we're only going to have 10 minutes, I would say, to give the floor to you guys in terms of the participants. So please, again, if you could actually write your questions or your suggestions on the chat. I can see loads of people raising their hand. Please remember, turn your video on, introduce yourself, unless you have already spoken, because just thinking of time. And in case we don't have the time to cover everyone, we will have the feedback form. I do sound like a broken record. Juana, you were the first one, so go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. I didn't introduce before. Yes, I work for the Global Forest Coalition as a gender expert. So a short observation, because I heard in those high-level panel forums organized by the Biodiversity Framework and also by UNDP, and then I heard the participation of Indigenous people major group, and they really reject this that we try to join this word Indigenous people, local communities. They prefer to separate this word, Indigenous people and local communities, because these 2 groups have different interests related to, especially to forest and to land also, because usually local communities can be a group also of Indigenous people, but they are different. They have different interests and they have different groups. They can be mixed and groups, or they can be also people from outside to the Indigenous people territories, etc. And sometimes local communities are used by extractive industries, and this have contrasting effect on Indigenous people's interests and territories. So what we can, it would be interesting if we can respect. They already decide, please don't use this together, Indigenous IPLC, but IP and local communities. This is one recommendation already accepted in those high-level panel forums. And the second is, I was thinking maybe it's to ask too much because of these different interests, because the conservation of forests is not only the task of indigenous people and local communities, but also consumers. So I don't know how we can include here the consumers, because the consumers, for instance, ask sometimes that they want to only to eat, let's say, dairy products or meat products that are fit with soy plantations. And then to produce soy, you have to cut and you have to deforest millions of hectares of forest. So also the consumers should be informed, and they should have also some kind of obligation, some kind of knowledge what we are eating. Also, we are affecting forests and we are affecting indigenous territories and indigenous rights. Of course, I don't know, maybe it's too much, but at least we should refer something about the consumers, and they should also be informed. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Juana, for that suggestion. We'll definitely include that because that's really a good point. Right, Marie-Ange, do you mind telling about your suggestion, and in a really short way, just to make sure that we can have other people participating, just conscious of time. Sorry, désolé, merci, thank you.
Okay, short, really short. Thank you so much. Then I had a question and a thought about connection with government. Then I heard that we will have some of the process concerning the policy brief for the toolkit will be connected to government, and I think it is very important because these communities, they are located in government, and their government are in charge of these people. They are national fund to these people. Then we can work with indigenous people, we can work with local communities, we can do research, we can manage to have the fund directly directed to the local communities, but they are related to government. And for example, when we're talking about deforestation for soya or deforestation for mining, sometimes the contracts are made with the government without any implication of local communities. And then, yes, we should avoid what we could call neocolonialism or imperialism, but how do you plan actually to connect with this government and to say that we are working with that, we are trying to empower these communities, and we definitely need the implication, the support of the government. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're completely right, Marie-Ange. We'll make sure that we're considering then as part of the challenges and the content of the toolkit, really. Martha, do you want to do it in 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 1 minute, grand max?
Thank you, Prune. I was writing in the chat that I'm going to contact Elena to share some other points about the local communities. It's quite important because we talk about traditional local communities or local communities with tradition or customary rights, because the indigenous peoples are only one way to call them, but in other countries, they are not being called indigenous people. So we have to be very careful with that. And also, I will contact her to talk about the rights of women in terms of land tenure, for instance, and other things. Thank you.
Thank you. That will be muchly appreciated. Elena, I think you're comfortable with that. That will be perfect. Great insights to great information directly from the source we like.
Yes.
Elena, do you want to add anything?
Yes, I just would like to tell that thank you very much to everyone for their comments and very important recommendations, and we'll take them into account when we'll draft the grassroots toolkit. And yes, I think that we'll follow the formal identification of indigenous people and local communities. Yes, and perhaps we'll divide them if UNEP structures, and UNDP already did it. Yes. Yeah. And regarding indigenous people and local communities identification, I just would like to tell that working in many countries, you see that not always indigenous people is defined as indigenous people. In many countries where it's the major nation, they are just forming the local communities, and what Marta told about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elena. So it's a 4:45. So Brian, well noted. Thank you very much for the text. We'll add that. Richard, same as well. And Brian, again, sorry, I'm reading it chronologically. So thank you so much. Unless there's anyone else who wants to raise their hand or talk about anything else in terms of the chat, because it's 56, to be honest, we're sharp on time. So it's absolutely brilliant in order to finish in 5 minutes. So leaving it just to the floor in case anyone else wants to raise their hand to have any suggestion for the Grassroots Toolkit or for the policy brief. I know we had to cut it short earlier. 1, 2, 3. It looks like an auction time right now. So I have multiple hats in my skills. No, great, perfect. So it's 56. So I'm afraid that I will move on. So thank you very much. So I'd like to close the webinar, and first to say that on the behalf of all of the FCI partners, I would like to thank all of the moderators today. Lucy, absolutely fantastic, doing it in 2 different languages. Lina, well, our job was a bit less in terms of just English, but I think thank you so much in terms of the panelists and the panelists from Viviana, Minnie, Ramson, and also Elena. What a fantastic job you have done to add to the conversation that we just had on those 2 products. And thank you very much for all of you who actually participated. I know Juana, Marie-Ange, Martha, you've been asking questions on the 3 topics, so amazing. Thank you so much. And I'm obviously not listing everyone else like I did earlier. So this was our last and final FCI webinar, but really what's next? Obviously, you're going to hear from us. So as for the other webinars, I will send out a survey in terms of hearing back from you by the end of the week to gather the feedback and additional material for the policy brief and the Grassroots Toolkit in preparation of the conference. As mentioned before, so we're trying to find a way to have all of the recordings of the webinars available in the months to come, because I know some of you could actually join the webinar, some of you couldn't because of time zone or other appointments. So we will find a way to actually put them on the FCI website and also on all of our partners' websites potentially. So please look out for our FCI website very soon. Finally, we all know that those webinars were in preparation of the conference, which is happening on the 22nd and the 23rd of November here in Monaco, so we will reach out regarding the finalization of those 2 products, so the Grassroots Toolkit and the policy brief. And we would like to thank you again for all of your contribution to make those products as useful as possible. I've named a few who wanted to volunteer in terms of helping. You will not be forgotten. Talking about the conference, as I am sure you will all understand, we do have some limited space, unfortunately, for in-person participation. So, of course, we will try to engage as many of you as possible if there is any interest. So one of the first jobs that all of the FCI partners have to do with myself is actually review the registration, the registrations received so far, and we will get back to you with a decision in due course as soon as possible, as we all need to book our travels. So with the above in mind, and unless there's anything else from anyone from the FCI partners, again, like an auction, 1, 2, 3, 4 for all of our other panelists. It's now time for me to close this webinar. And before doing so, I just want to remind everyone to remind or inform you that the FCI call for projects is going to be open via the Foundation's website all over June. So if you do want to submit some proposal for your projects, feel free to do so. And then we know that for the 15 of you who do have been pre-selected in terms of the files. That's our next mission for you to actually hear from us very soon. So on the behalf of all of the FCI partners, I thank you so much, and I wish you all a very good day.